Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Jeffrey Kripal, welcome back to the new school.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again, Michael.
I'm going to remind our viewers and listeners that you hold the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University in Houston. And you are the author of 13, reasonably soon to be 14 books. And we have been working our way through each of these books. And I have to say that the experience of doing this continues to change me, Jeff. It's a slow awakening via text. That's how I would describe it. But it's very real. Very real.
That's a nice description.
Yeah.
I like that.
So the book we're going to discuss today is called The Superhumanities: Historical Precedents, Moral Objections, New Realities. And I'm going to start because this is a complex book, as well as, you say, a simple book. You say the whole story is in the title, The Superhumanities.
Yeah.
And we'll unpack that. But this isn't written in your voice. This is written in the voice, so I'll read it. It's the inside cover quote, but it's very useful to our listeners and to understand what this is. And it goes like this. What would happen if we reimagined the humanities as the superhumanities? If we acknowledged and celebrated the undercurrents of the fantastic within our humanistic disciplines, entirely new cultural worlds and meanings would become possible. This is Jeffrey J. Kripal's vision of the future: to revive the suppressed dimension of the superhumanities, which consists of rare but real altered states of knowledge that have driven the creative processes of many of our most revered authors, artists, and activists. In Kripal's telling, the history of the humanities is filled with precognitive dreams, evolving superhumans, and doubled selves. The basic idea of the superhuman for Kripal is at the core of who and what the human species has tried to become over millennia and around the planet. After diagnosing the basic malaise of the humanities, that the truth must be depressing, Kripal shows how it can all be done differently. He argues that we have to decolonize reality itself if we are going to take human diversity seriously. Toward this end, he engages psychoanalytic, Black, critical, feminist, post-colonial, queer, and eco-critical thought. He works through objections to the superhumanities while also recognizing the new realities represented by the contemporary sciences. In doing so, he tries to move beyond naysaying practices of a critique toward a future that can embrace those critiques with a more holistic view, a view that recognizes the human being as both a socio-political animal as well as an evolved cosmic species that understands and experiences itself as something super. Now, Jeff, I imagine you didn't write that, but you probably reviewed it. Does it do justice to your work as you hear it?
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds really good to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they probably did ask me to write that, but then they turned it into a third person voice,
Okay. Well, you did a good job then.
Yeah.
I sometimes have the experience, but not always, that each book of yours that I read in depth and review feels to me like the best book. That's not always true, but it happens repeatedly. I pulled out, authors of the impossible, the paranormal, and the sacred, which you've said is your favorite text. I pulled out Mutants and Mystics, science fiction, superhero comics, and the paranormal, which started as an introduction to this book. And I especially pulled out the Esalen book because Esalen, America and the Religion of No Religion, because the Esalen book seems in certain ways to me comparable in that both are cultural studies that review a wide range of writers and thinkers and artists. So, but this book really blew me away because of the incredible range of thinkers and writers that you cover. And I guess the starting place for me, because we haven't done this before, is to ask you how you write. I mean, I know we've said you get up early in the morning. You said it's a combination of caffeine and OCD, obsessive compulsive stuff. But I don't know how. Let me start with this. Do you outline these books before you start writing them?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I write a table of contents that I work with, but it always morphs dramatically as I work on the book. And, the books are, my phrases, they're a dance. Mm-hmm. They're a dance between myself and the editor and what can be heard and what can be said, I mean, and it's a constant negotiation. This book in particular was written during COVID.
Right. So
I was home a lot, and I don't know if that's reflected in the book or not, but it's me really looking around. It's not just COVID. It's not just a global pandemic. It's me looking around at the landscape, the national and international landscape of higher education, and trying to diagnose what's really wrong with the humanities and where we should go from here.
What time do you get up to start writing?
I get up at 4.
Okay. And at what time are you at your desk with your books and everything?
4:30.
Okay. And let's say you're working on one of the chapters here. A lot of your chapters, and a lot of your books, but here specifically, you kind of string together small portraits of different writers. So presumably, when you're going to do a portrait of a specific writer, you have his book or books in front of you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't just, I'm not just writing, but sometimes in the morning I'm reading to write, as I call it.
Okay. So let's just take chapter 1, Religion as Legitimate Science Fiction. This guy, Martin Riesbrot, the German sociologist, he may not be a good example, but you would have his book or books in front of you as you write.
Yeah.
And then you write about a certain person, but you also, in the course of writing about that person, you're riffing on all kinds of other people who come to your mind as you do that segment.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the segment after that is called African Gnosis and Ancient Egypt, all as one. So there, you are going through a series of individuals, but do you have at that point some key texts on Egypt in front of you?
I mean, I have all those people in front of me. I mean, the way I write, Michael, is so I write in these little sections, and I might spend weeks or months reading these texts, and then I'll sit down and write this one section, based on it. A lot of scholarship is what we call ventriloquism.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
you're using the author to say what it is you have to say.
Yeah.
So I want to do that. I want to be faithful to the representation of the particular author, but I also want to say what it is I really think. So it's really a combination of those two things.
Now, I've never heard you talk about the nature of your memory. Do you have an eidetic memory?
I do not.
Okay. But you clearly have a robust memory, shall we say.
I have a robust library.
You
I
have a
mean,
robust library.
I think we exteriorize our memory, right? I mean,
Yeah, right.
I really do. I really think that I love books. I think they're windows to the soul, as it were. And
Yeah.
so when I look out at my library, I'm like, oh, I know what that person, that person, that person said. And I mean, we can talk about how I mean, maybe to get down to how I write, you know, things that obsess me, ideas that obsess me. I thought years ago, I would tell this or that grad student or this or that, oh, you should write this book or you should do this. And what I realized over the years is what I should have really been thinking is, oh, I should do that or I should write that, or because they're not that's not their idea. They're not going to pursue that. And so I don't, but I always was projecting outwards, and when you realize those are projections, then I think you can own a kind of creative voice.
Mm-hmm. So you start at 4. What time do you end?
About not it depends on the day, but usually around 8:30 or 9:30.
8:30. So often a 5-hour day of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
quote your dean as in your acknowledgement. You quote your dean, who you have a very high regard for, as saying she understood that Jeff needs to write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my joke was, I don't know if I tell it in that book, but my joke is I was a very bad associate dean because I was always writing and thinking. But the beauty of working so early, first of all, Kathleen worked very late, so we could sort of cover almost the entire day, because she would like be sending me emails like at 1 or 2 in the morning, in which I'm fast asleep, and then I would be up at 4, and so there were only a couple hours that we didn't have our eyes on the ball, as it were. But the other thing about writing early is it frees you up, or it frees me up for the rest of the day. I don't feel guilty or any need to go write or read, after 8:30 or 9 in the morning, because I've already done it. And so that, I think that's partly why I enjoy administration, Michael, is I enjoy working with people, and I don't have the inclination or the need to express myself in a writing or reading fashion at a certain point of the day.
That's beautiful. So you mentioned that you start by writing a table of contents, and so let's go. You have
a title, by the way.
And a title, right?
There are, by the way, secrets to this book that I can tell you. One of which is that if you take the cover off, it's Superman blue and red.
Ah, how beautiful!
Yeah, and I didn't have anything to do with that, by the way. And that may be just a pure accident, but one of my people at the press pointed that out.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Well, let's just start by kind of working our way through it, starting with the prologue. Let's start with the story of James. Tell us about James.
Well, James is a pseudonym. He was my grad student. He grew up in what I would call fundamentalist Texas. And he was going to kill himself when he was a young man. So he was a teenager and was going to kill himself. And his parents went out for the evening and left the gun cabinet unlocked. And he got his dad's pistol and was going to shoot himself that night. And he described to me, and then later to Richard Baker Roshi, Ouija driving to the Barnes. It was a Barnes and Noble. It was a major bookstore. I think I called it a major bookstore in the book, but it was actually a Barnes and Noble. And he had never been in this bookstore because he wasn't allowed to go in it. It was a secular bookstore, and he was in a kind of trance. And he walked right to the section labeled philosophy. He didn't even know what the word meant, and a book literally flew off the shelf and landed at his feet. And it was Friedrich Nietzsche's "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." And he took it home in a lightning storm. It was lightning and storming outside, and read the prologue. And in tears, was converted to the humanities, or what I call the superhumanities, right then and there, and put the gun away and didn't kill himself.
He walked outside into a rainstorm. I stared up at the stars between the clouds and laughed, a divine laughter, an ecstatic laughter while the rain poured down. It was the greatest moment I had ever experienced. When my sides ached and the rain abated, I walked back inside, dried off, and read the rest of the book. And he would go on to engage in a full study of Nietzsche's body of work, write a dissertation on occult superhumans inspired by Nietzsche, and so on. We could go on about that story. Now, I doubt that it's any accident that you start with that story, because perhaps the outstanding figure in this whole book, this whole extraordinary book with hundreds of portraits and many portraits, is Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with Nietzsche,
mm-hmm.
and you talk about how you, at that point, were actively reading not only everything by Nietzsche, but the secondary literature and so on. So why is Nietzsche such an absolutely central figure, not only in this book, but in other books as well, in your description of what the anemic humanities could be if we recognize them as the superhumanities?
Yeah. So, first of all, I had not read Nietzsche ever. I had been schooled in Sigmund Freud and knew a lot of Freud and a lot of psychoanalysis, but had not read Nietzsche until 2017 or whatever date I give it there. And Nietzsche comes before Freud, by the way, also writing in German. And so I had read a lot of references to Nietzsche, but I actually hadn't read Nietzsche. And I had all the stereotypes that people have about Nietzsche, that he said God was dead, and he was an angry atheist, and he was a kind of early kind of postmodern or post-structuralist thinker, and so on. And then I had graduate students like James. James was not the only one, whose lives were completely transformed by reading Nietzsche. And I was just like, who is this? Who is this guy? Who is this writer? What are these books about? And so I just got really fascinated by the writer, and I started to read the books, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was. And the reason Nietzsche plays such an important role in this book is he didn't invent, but he basically brought the term superhuman or superman into the English language through the German Übermensch. And so the Superhumanities is really named after the superhuman, which is really what I think Nietzsche had in mind when he named it the Übermensch. And my argument is that, look, if we read really well-known humanists carefully, we're going to see these superhuman altered states constantly in their work. And people just focus on the naysaying, on the critical theory, on the negative, which is all there too, but it's preparation really for the affirmations. And so what I want us to do is do both the naysaying and the yay-saying. And I think this is in fact faithful to certainly the late Nietzsche, but I think also the earlier Nietzsche too. So I just think Nietzsche's been completely misread and completely misheard and misreceived. But there are individuals who I do think read him carefully and more fully receive him. And so I talk about them in the book. I mean, Michael, if I could just reiterate, my love of Nietzsche is because of people. I was transformed as a reader of Nietzsche really through human beings like James. And I really want to emphasize that. It's really listening to people's experiences and reading experiences, reading as revelation, not the text as revelation, but the reading of that as revelation. It was really what completely turned me on to this particular topic.
I'll just read a couple of little things and then we'll talk about it. On 86, no one then wrote more to get us to the superhumanities than Friedrich Nietzsche. No one also wrote more that has prevented the same. Nietzsche, in other words, did not just initiate the superhuman in modern Western intellectual history, he also ruined it for the rest of us. Or more accurately and more fairly to Nietzsche himself, no academic reception history of a single thinker has done more to prevent the superhumanities from taking shape than the reception or anti-reception of Friedrich Nietzsche. But it need not be so. I am presently reading as much of the Nietzschean corpus and its surrounding secondary scholarly literature as I can. And then you talk about reading the notebooks and so forth. I have not found what I assumed I would find, as you just said. What I found reading Nietzsche, in other words, was that academics generally ignore, really reverse, Nietzsche's own authorial intentions and confirm our own nearsighted nihilisms and deconstructions. Perhaps most surprising of all, what I found in Nietzsche was what might well be considered the origin point of modern evolutionary spirituality, or what I have elsewhere described and tracked as modern evolutionary esotericism. More specifically, I found a rigorous philosophical vision of a coming superspecies with power over time itself, a vision that was in turn founded on an actual direct experience with the real, including the actual structure of space-time and a subsequent encounter poetically but truly, so on. I confess I was stunned. For almost 2 decades, I had attempted to trace the endless ramifications of cultural and moral explorations of these evolutionary spiritualities and their paranormal effects, and so on. And then Nietzsche just blows you away, right? Now, Did you start? I mean, yes, Nietzsche brought super into high eminence in Western culture, but you have discovered super throughout the history of Western culture. Did you start emphasizing super in your own writing after you read Nietzsche, or was it already with your familiarity with Aurobindo and others an important part of your lexicon? Did it elevate the super to the very high level that it now appears in your work?
Well, it's not just in Western Christian or European culture. I think it's global.
Right.
I think the idea of up or super is everywhere and always. And to answer your question, no, it did not start with Nietzsche. It started way before that, really as far back as the 90s with Colley's Child. But certainly by the Esalen book in 2007, the super is foregrounded, but it's primarily through Aurobindo, the anti-colonial and writer and spiritual teacher, and then through superhero comics with mutants and mystics, Michael. And I think these are the receptions of Nietzsche that are much more accurate. I think Aurobindo's reading of Nietzsche is actually much more astute, and I think the superhero reception of Nietzsche, and it is Nietzsche, by the way. It's so Nietzsche, is in some ways more accurate. In other ways, not as faithful for sure, but in other ways, yes. So I had received and been writing about evolutionary esotericism for decades before I picked up Nietzsche, is what I'm trying to say.
So then another seminal figure for you, and I see you as one of two inheritors of his lineage at the highest level, the other being Howard Gardner at Harvard, and you read him in very different ways, is William James. And William James is you compare and contrast him with Nietzsche. So tell us a little about your section on him is called William James, From the Psychical to the Pragmatic. Talk to us a little about James and Nietzsche and what you take from James.
Well, first of all, I think this Jamesian tradition of radical empiricism, you focus on what human beings actually experience and what they actually report to have experienced, and then you reason out from there. That's a very Jamesian kind of position, and you're looking for the margins, you're looking for the extreme, you're not looking for the ordinary or the traditional. And James himself was fascinated by what we would today call New Age thought. I mean, then it was just called New Thought, but it was basically mediums and psychics, and it was basically New Age material. That's really what it was in the late 19th, early 20th century. James then was also very interested in psychedelics, what Huxley would later call psychedelics. He was interested in plants and ingesting molecules that would alter his consciousness dramatically and deriving philosophical insight from those altered states. I think that's really what sets us apart. And then, he ends his life with this beautiful book called A Pluralistic Universe, in which he moves back and forth between a pluralism and a monism. And he doesn't really land on either, but he thinks both are true. And he uses the word superhuman all the time to describe this. It's really a kind of panpsychism. But he uses the word superhuman and he uses the word multiverse a lot. And so he originates, I think, a lot of the ideas that would play out later in the 20th century and now the 21st century. And I focus on this Jamesian tradition is really, again, a focus on people and people's experiences. And I think if you really listen to people, if you begin there, a lot of these dogmas get shattered very quickly. And I mean the academic dogmas as well as the religious dogmas. I just think they're mistaken if you listen to people.
Now, James, in turn, was influenced by Schopenhauer.
Well, he was influenced, so was Nietzsche, by the way.
Yeah.
Nietzsche was really influenced by Schopenhauer as well. I mean, James is more or less a contemporary of Nietzsche, so he certainly knows Nietzsche through the reception history, and he reads German but Nietzsche's not a thing yet. He's not a big deal, but James certainly knows about him, but he's going to pick up on James in a different way, I think, that's much more faithful to what I'm trying to do. A kind of psychical Nietzsche, a kind of affirmation of some kind of evolving superhuman nature.
And James also famously met Freud when Freud came over to lecture.
Yeah, he did. He met a lot of people, actually. He also was the professor of W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most famous Black sociologists and critical theorists of whiteness, really, in the early part of the century. And that was a student of James as well. And Du Bois's notion of double consciousness is really indebted in some ways to James's interest in the fourth dimension and in psychical research, as well as Black culture as a whole.
Here's a beautiful quote from you. And we didn't talk about Varieties of Religious Experience, which is the book everybody reads by James, but which is an extraordinary book. The final truth is that superhumans are everywhere in the Jamesian circle. They are both the intellectual agents of the superhermeneutic and its desired future goal. They are interpreting themselves into fuller and fuller superhuman forms of consciousness. So why do we not read William James through such a late, really final and mature superhumanism? Easy, because it is not depressing. Instead, we are told endlessly how James emphasized difference over similarity, how he could not possibly have been a dreaded perennialist, although he often sounds exactly like one, how he understood all truth as what psychologically worked for a time and was pragmatic. This is simply not what William James finally concluded. So that goes to your second chapter here, the truth must be depressing. And this is really a formative point in this whole book, that the humanities, as it is taught today, has been reduced to a critique that there are no final truths, that everything is about power and word games and colonialism and so on, and that the humanities are fundamentally depressing, and therefore the purpose of the superhumanities is to reinvigorate the study of the humanities as a core source of connection to the one, or whatever we want to call the higher, or the other, as you put it, in human beings as two. So let me go here. And I'm not sure this is exactly right, but you talk about Harold Bloom in this book, and we can come to that too. The great Yale literary critic, extraordinarily gifted man. But as you well know, he wrote a book on the anxiety of influence, right?
Yeah, right.
And what he said, and I'm asking you this about yourself, is that because great thinkers can feel an anxiety of influence, that their method is often a strong misreading of their predecessors.
Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
I would be tempted to argue that this whole book, perhaps your whole oeuvre, is a strong misreading of your predecessor.
Yeah, and I, of course, like most authors, including the ones Bloom treats, I would say no, it's not. I would say no, it's it's a rereading, or it's a deeper reading. It's an affirmation of what they were about. But again, Michael, I say that in the context of an intellectual who, in fact, may be wrong. You know, do I have that anxiety? No, I don't. I actually don't have that anxiety. I think we got to get out of that. I think that's part of the depression, that we just got to let that go and go on. So no,
Okay.
I don't think I'm misreading, but
all right. But
I am
rereading.
I am countering. I mean, let me back up a little bit on that. I am countering this hegemonic orthodoxy, or this cultural assumption that I think is dominant, but I think that is very fragile. I don't think that the cultural dominant, or the orthodoxy is stable. You know, I think it's profoundly unstable and profoundly fragile, and that's precisely why it erupts in violence and extremity so often. And I think, yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Well, things get really juicy when one takes different approaches and enters into dialogue. And I'm not attached to your feeling an anxiety of influence. I'm really not. And I accept your version of a strong new reading or a strong rereading of these people. As you know, I'm very interested in a theory of personality and character structure called Enneagram that you have not studied. And I think a lot about where you fall on it. And it just so people understand what I'm talking about, Enneagram came to the West first through Gurdjieff, who you talk about in the book. But then the Enneagram of personality came from a Latin American mystic named Oscar Ichazo. And he created the Enneagram of personality. And the Enneagram of personality has 9 character structures. You know, 1 is the perfectionist, 2 is the helper, 3 the achiever, 4 the individualist, 5 the observer, which is me, 6 the loyalist, 7 the enthusiast, 8 the iconoclast, and 9 the peacemaker. Now, I've thought a lot about what your Enneagram is, and it's not considered polite to lay your theory
It's
of.
okay. You don't have to be polite, Michael. What am I? I'm curious.
Well, here's the thing. I think you fall, uh, as I do, in the 5, 6, 7, 8 area. The 5, the observer, has an absolute passion for knowledge. They're gluttons for knowledge. And they actually think that knowledge is a adequate substitute for human relationships. Now, I'm a 5. Uh, you're not a 6 at all. But the 7, the enthusiast, you have a lot of the evidence of. You enjoy working with people. You gather all these groups at Esalen, and the 7s are very kind, nice, wonderful, joyful human beings. So you've got some 5 in you, you've got some 7 in you, but the 8 is one of the most powerful things on the Enneagram, and that is the iconoclast. And I remember listening to one of your talks where you said, we must now proceed to break things carefully. And so you have that, and you spoke of Bernardo Kastrup as, a very different approach, that he just takes no prisoners and,
Right.
just goes for
He's
it.
he's an attack
the
dog.
idealist, the Platonist.
I think what I said is he's an attack dog who goes after people I would go after if I wasn't such a nice guy.
Right, exactly. That's what you said. And so what I teeter back and forth between is, are you an 8, the iconoclast, with a 7 wing, which makes you so kind? Are you a 7 with an 8 wing? And then I thought maybe you're like me, the 5, which on inner arrows goes to both 7 and 8, but you're not an isolationist the way I am. So the point of this whole disquisition is this sense of being an iconoclast in a very fundamental way, of breaking things, breaking old idols, literally, but doing so in a kind and disarming way. You will make these very strong statements and take these very strong positions, and then you'll say, but am I right? Maybe I'm not right. My friends wouldn't agree with me. Maybe they're right, and so you break things carefully and kindly. And that gives your work a certain power because it's very skillful.
Yeah, the iconoclast, that rings true to me, actually. I mean, that's all my work. All my early work on gender and sexual orientation was profoundly iconoclastic,
Right.
and I think I'm drawn to these paranormal phenomena precisely because they're iconoclastic too. I see that, and I would just add to that. I don't even think I have to break things. I think they're fragile to begin with, and they break on their own. But I want to help that process along, I guess, because I think we're bigger than these idols.
Right. But the idols, I mean, you either can or can't have it both ways. But in your case, you always do have it both ways. You take both positions as true. But the idols, while they may be fragile, are nonetheless extremely pervasive, in this case, in the whole institutional structure of the humanities.
That's true.
I mean, and you point out that the game has very high stakes. It's like the way we teach the humanities, the way we populate our socially constructed egos and our collective culture is, on the one hand, with the scientists, which are on the lead in a materialist form, and then we take the humanities and we turn them into word games and very depressing things. And so, given, which you talk about in this book, that we are on a radically self-destructive trajectory of the worst kind, to revivify the humanities as the full partner of the sciences is not a trivial enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really have it both ways, that these things are just fragile and are coming apart themselves, and at the same time recognize how powerfully they dominate our consciousness, unless you want to have it both ways.
No, I mean, and there, of course, I am the iconoclast. That's my role in the academy anyway.
Right.
And I'm happy with that. I've been rejected and censored and bullseyed and canceled for my work. I know what that feels like. Am I comfortable with that? No. Is anybody? No, nobody's comfortable with that. But I do think that's the role of the intellectual, or certainly of the person that I want to be. So I don't know. I don't know about having it both ways. I mean, I do have it both ways. I mean, the humanists too, Michael. I mean, there is this bigger super field that we're embedded in, and yet we have to be, or we are, social and embodied and individual egos. And I guess I'm really comfortable with both of those, and don't want to deny either one of those, even though
Right.
I am constantly denying what the ego, the social ego, I suppose.
Let's go to page 108 and following, where we're still with William James. And I'm just going to read a couple of lines here. In the end, James himself advances what is a clear hermetic conviction, namely that our work on the superhuman consciousness is itself both an expression and advance of the superhuman consciousness, that consciousness is evolving itself in and through such work. In James's own language, once we take up the pluralistic universe as our working hypothesis, our scholarship and science become self-reparative through us. Such a universe's disconnections are remedied in part by our behavior, because we are working this through. Thus do philosophy and reality, theory and action, work in the same circle indefinitely. So that leads you to a conversation about ontological polytheism and moral pluralism through the work of a cultural psychologist and anthropologist named Richard Schroeder. Schroeder.
Yeah.
So talk to us about Schroeder's three basic options for a post-Nietzschean anthropology.
Well, I knew Richard well in graduate school. He was one of my teachers, and he was Richard still is really unique among a lot of intellectuals in that he sees the ontological challenge, and that there's an ontological reality behind a lot of these ideas. So he talks about ontological pluralism, by which he means different realities. There are different reality posits. It's not just a matter of words or people making shit up. It's like, no, reality is really different if you speak a different language or live in a different period or both. And I just think Richard is right about that. I think that's where the pluralism comes in. That's where the ontological pluralism comes in. And where of course I'm disagreeing with Richard is on his reading of Nietzsche again, because he sees Nietzsche as a kind of null hypothesis, that none of these language, these are all language games. These are all ways of projecting things. And of course, I think it's more complicated than that. I think Nietzsche is much more along his ontological polytheism that Richard is promoting. Because I think that's right, and I think that's where Nietzsche is.
And when you talk about these different reality posits, that takes us back to your really extraordinary thinking on how in different periods of time, reality acts in different ways, that the
Yeah.
reality posits influence whatever we call the other, and therefore the other in different in, collective imaginal settings acts in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that. I mean that in the most dramatic and possible ways. I mean, I think people float and fly in particular worldviews, and they don't in others. And so matter itself behaves differently depending on the belief systems. So belief and language have a tremendous impact on the behavior of physical events too.
So remind us about Teresa of Avila and Brother Joseph.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think Teresa and Joseph of Cupertino really floated or really flew. And I don't think that was in there. They weren't the agents of that flying or floating, and they themselves would say that. And I think we should be studying that. We should be talking about that as with everything else. We should be talking about apports. We should be talking about mind over matter effects. We should be talking about psychokinetic effects. But of course we don't, because we consider those things not real.
And
So
for
we
those
don't.
who are naturally skeptical about these claims, how do you pronounce his name? Ira at Harvard?
Oh, Carlos Ayer.
Ira, who wrote this extraordinary book, which you recommended, called They Flew,
Yeah.
about both Brother Joseph and Teresa of Avila, and how her nuns would pile on top of her to keep her from floating up to the ceiling when the gentry were around, because it was embarrassing.
Yeah. So Carlos is a historian. He's a historian of early modern culture at Yale University. And They Flew is his most recent book. The subtitle is A History of the Impossible. And it's not just about Teresa and Joseph. It's about a whole bunch of individuals, mostly from Italy and Spain in the 16th and 17th century, and how these individuals became the objects of early demonology. And demonology for Carlos is a kind of early skepticism. It's how these things are resisted. You don't question the fact yet that they happen. You question the agency of them. They're from the devil. They're not from God.
There's a very interesting conversation that you do about Nisargadatta. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Nisargadatta, that's how I would pronounce it.
Yeah. Could you talk to us about Nisargadatta?
Well, he's a modern Indian spiritual teacher, and he's advancing a kind of form of Advaita Vedanta that sees all things as one, as connected to this Brahman, and that the individual self is essentially illusory. So there's a recognition that the human is two, but there's an absolute affirmation of this oneness, or this non-duality. I shouldn't call it a oneness. This non-duality that is outside or above the human social ego. And I love Nisargadatta. Because he's so his teachings, which are in these books, primarily I Am That, so distinct and quick and radical and to the point that I quote him in here because I think it's really, really significant as a writer to have these examples.
Now, going back to the table of contents, just to help our listeners keep track of things, the first chapter was called Legitimate Science Fiction from the History of Religions to the Superhumanities.
Yeah.
The second, what we've been talking about, The Truth Must Be Depressing, Immunological Responses of the Intellectual Body. And the third, which I want to come to now, though we've been there a bit, is called The Humanist Two, Toward an Apophatic Anthropology. And then fourth will be Theory as to Rewriting the Real. And that's the last major chapter. So in The Humanist Two, Toward an Apophatic Anthropology, let's define apophatic for people. And you start with a quote from Albert Camus, from his dissertation, I believe. The miracle is that the two may not be contradictory.
Well, it's a Greek-based term. It means saying away, apophasis. So
Mhm.
it's any kind of mystical thought that says away or deconstructs what we think of as God or the soul.
Mhm.
So there's some more fundamental ground of being or emptiness or Brahman or however the culture frames it, but there's some more foundational level of reality that is above or below, depending on your metaphor, the social ego, the Michaels and the Jeffs of the world.
In this chapter, your first significant portrait is of someone I've read a bit of, Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, the author of
Yeah.
three big books on Hegel, The Construction of the Modern Self, and The Rules of the Secular Age and Its Imminent Frame, respectively. And I think he has a new book out. Uh, I can't remember for sure, but isn't it called something like Toward a Post-Human Philosophy or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't
Okay,
know. That's
okay, I
interesting.
could be wrong about that. But why is Charles Taylor important to you here?
Well, his basic idea that the human being was much more porous, much more open to other realities, 500 years ago, and that the modern self is much more buffered, as he puts it, is much more contained. And I just think that's true. I mean, I
Mhm.
certainly feel buffered. I certainly feel like I'm separate from the world. And Taylor's point is that medieval people before the modern period, much less people in other cultures, are not. They have a much more common access to other dimensions of reality. It doesn't mean they're better, um, but it just means we've paid something for science and rationalism that I think is really worth emphasizing.
And we've paid a lot for, as you described, the pendulum swing between idealism and materialism, between Plato and Aristotle, and how the pendulum has swung way toward the materialist end and the saying away of the whole Platonic, Neoplatonic idealist theory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and here is where you come to a summary of the human as two, which we've talked about before, but because it's central to this book, let's talk about it again. And here you turn first, in a way, to Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860. What I am calling human as two is constituted by the subject object split of and as ordinary experience. Uh, so for Schopenhauer, the subject is the seat of all cognition, but can never be cognized itself. So why is Schopenhauer so important to you, so as to begin your whole section on the human as two with Schopenhauer?
Well, the simple reason is I've read a lot of Schopenhauer, uh, and because he played such an important role in the formation of Nietzsche and in the history of Western philosophy. The the other reason is that Schopenhauer is again one of these figures in the history of Western thought who is clearly obsessed with what we today call the paranormal or the extraordinary, but he doesn't see it as part of the individual or part of the person. He sees it arising more from this more unconscious dimension of the human being, this will. And so for Schopenhauer, paranormal phenomena are essentially proof of what he calls idealism, this idea that only the will is real, and that certainly the individual and material reality is an expression or a representation of the will, to sort of bastardize, simplify Schopenhauer's philosophy. It's usually described as an idealism, and it's usually seen as depressing. There's a kind of, the will is not generally seen as good or as conscious in this model, but as something unconscious and somehow negative.
The will interests me in psychology and philosophy because, it's not hard for people to say, like the common trope in my circles anyway, is that love is everything. And then,
Yeah.
okay, you can get from love is everything to love and wisdom. Love without wisdom is blind. Wisdom without love is cold. You get to love and wisdom. But the third term of will gets very short shrift. I mean, I think of it as love from the heart, wisdom from the mind. Will is expressed through the hands, heart, head, hands. Though, of course, those physical locations are very inexact. But in psychology, or a lot of psychology, will also gets short shrift. Rollo May talks about love and will. Freud talks about love and work can be seen as a substitute for will. Roberto Assagioli, the founder of psychosynthesis, is one of the few people who centers will as a core dimension. So you spoke here of will as often being seen as, less conscious. But I'm just curious, when you talk about how Schopenhauer sees will, we must recognize that our will, our consciousness, our deepest subjectivity is the very will, consciousness, or subjectivity of nature coming to know itself. So how do you hold will in your own view of things, having read Schopenhauer deeply, but also having absorbed everything else you've absorbed?
I think our modern conceptions of human rights and individual freedom are naive, to be frank about it. I think there are hangups. I think we have particular views of the individual or the person or private property and our whole legal system is based on some kind of atomic individualism. And I think why I find Schopenhauer's philosophy so rich, but all of really Indian philosophy as well, which is, and Schopenhauer is one of the big early fans of Indian philosophy, by the way, is that it decenters the will or the person. And this is what drove me to be so fascinated with psychoanalysis and Freud early on. Was I became very aware, certainly in the earliest years of the seminary, that human beings do not know why they do certain things, that they're driven to do certain things by their Freud would say their libido, their desire. I think Schopenhauer would say it's the will. It's this dark will that's driving them to do X, Y, and Z. So this is what I mean by, this is one of the things I mean by the humanist too, is this split in the person between that which is actually willing a certain behavior or situation and that which is really conscious or the social self or the Michael or the Jeff. I just don't think that Michael or that Jeff is in control and is running the show. I think
Not even
there's
remotely.
yeah, I just don't believe that for a second. And I think a lot of impossible phenomena or a lot of paranormal phenomena are rejected because we want to hold on to that conscious individualism.
Yeah.
Like precognition, by the way. I think it's rejected out of hand because it violates our sense of the future and our sense of free will. Whether it does or doesn't, I don't know. I mean, that's up for debate, but I think that's why it's rejected.
And as you pointed out, Nietzsche, coming back to Nietzsche, held a theory of space and time and so on that was very close to the block theory of the universe, where past, present, and future are all contemporaneous in some sense, and that enables us to understand precognition and other anomalous phenomena as a kind of leakage or movement between those three coexisting realities.
I think so. I think that's precisely where we go. And Nietzsche also rejected. He was early on fascinated with Schopenhauer for his
Yeah.
idealism, but he rejected Schopenhauer later in his career precisely because it was too depressing. And Nietzsche wanted something that was more affirming and more ecstatic and more positive because that was his experience. And he wanted a philosophy to reflect what he actually knew. And so again, I think there's a lesson there for us. I think we need to affirm that those ecstatic moments as well.
And that, to skip ahead for a moment to the end of the book, this is a very ecstatic book. The solid rock was once flowing. The image from your trip to Hawaii of the molten core exploding in this joyful thing. Quite an orgasmic view, by the way. And then calcifying into hardened rock, which is what
or
received
or,
medicines are.
but devastating for certainly, I mean, my trip to Hawaii, certainly to the homeowner. I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, you buy a home and then this lava comes. I mean, what? I mean, this lava doesn't turn into dirt for tens of thousands of years. I mean, you're long gone. I mean, so the molten flowing certainly does not privilege the individual ego, Michael, is what I'm trying to say. Although it is what forms the island. It is exactly what forms the culture or the tradition. So there again, I'm trying to affirm both the culture or the historical tradition, but also affirm this flowing lava that's behind it all, I think.
Well, let me ask you this. You don't talk about this, but it obviously comes to me. Um, it doesn't privilege the individual, but the orgasm privileges the individual. And it's not far from the explosive molten lava to the orgasm, which is a form of ecstatic experience for sure, and very related to your discussion of eros and the mystical states as one. So it seems to me one could read your ecstatic ending of this book, which talks about cosmic love, as also related to the human potential to know a bit of the ecstatic through orgasm.
Again, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, that reading sounds perfectly fine to me. I mean, I hope you're right, but did I intend that? No, I didn't intend that. Have we talked? I forget what we've talked about in this series. Did we talk about supersexuality and the whole Columbia plenary and all that?
No, let's talk about that.
I mean, it's related here. It's very much related to this, and it's related to your reading of the conclusion of the orgasmic book. I was asked to give a plenary. They were founding a new center for the study of sexuality and religion at Columbia, and I was asked to give the plenary for it to open it up. And I basically came in and I said, look, you can talk about anything in sexuality and gender studies, pretty much anything, except transcendence. You cannot talk about people having transcendent experiences during sexual arousal or around sexual activity. But that's really what first drew me to erotic forms of mystical experience, is precisely that fusion of sex and spirit. Mm-hmm. And I continue to think that that's really at the core of a lot of this. And this later interest in the paranormal, it's really a fusion of matter and mind. But it's very similar to this earlier fusion of sex and spirit that we see. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by supersexuality is we have these sexualities, but we're constantly reducing them to instinct or reproduction or orgasm, where I want to say, no, these are also windows into some greater reality that human beings also experience. And that's very psychoanalytic of me. It's not Freudian in the sense that it again affirms transcendence, but it's very psychoanalytic.
Yeah, I mean, there's sex without eros and there's eros without sex. And the tantric tradition really, and the whole theory of especially male, uh, withdrawal, not having an orgasm, speaks to one dimension of that. But also the human experience. I mean, I think of Dante or anybody else, that something is triggered by a vision of a beautiful woman or man or whatever, and it becomes a life passion. It becomes an incredibly powerful erotic expression, right? That is very much about spirit.
Right. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of speak to the more to my present experience, I just finished reading pretty carefully John Mack's two books on abduction in the 90s, Abduction and Passport to the Cosmos. And they're filled with sex, by the way. They're absolutely filled with sex, right. Penises and vaginas and sexual fluids and sexual experiments and you name it. It's everywhere. And hybridity. There's a kind of human alien hybridity that runs there. And the common response, though, that you get to these moments is giggling.
Right.
People giggle, people laugh at these. I mean, the very first episode of South Park was making fun of Whitley Strieber's abduction experience. So what is going on there? And again, to go back to James, this Jamesian method, it wants to privilege the human experience, in this case of human alien hybridity and sexuality, but also, a kind of transformation of the human that often occurs in these moments. And so it's focused on the individual, but sometimes this individual experience offends us, and we only have giggling to resist it, is what I'm trying to say. But I'm not a fan of that giggling, of that particular. I'm a fan of giggling, but I'm not a fan of that giggling, because I think that, again, it's a human experience. It's an experience that gets dismissed, it gets ridiculed through this mechanism, and I think it's a form of supersexuality that gets dismissed, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of John Mack's work, and as I think I spent a summer totally unknowing of it, living in the apartment of the artist who introduced John Mack to the people who had the abduction experiences in Lower Manhattan. What was his name?
Bud Hopkins?
Yes, and Bud Hopkins. I slept in his bed, for God's sake, for a whole summer. But I want to go now to the fourth chapter. There's an important.
Let me close. Let me close this chapter, Michael. Yeah. I mean, Michael, look, an apophatic anthropology, it simply means the human is two. Yeah. It means that there's this historical, social, political animal that we are, and that we need to understand and analyze. But it's we also are a portal, or we can tap into this larger dimension of some other reality. And that's the apophatic part of it. That's and I want to argue that the human being is the ultimate scientific censor, that the human experience is what reality really is like, and that we need to listen to human beings to get this doubleness. So that's really what that chapter is. And then the fourth chapter kind of follows on that.
That's beautiful. Before we get into the fourth chapter, I want to go, and I can't remember where you put it, could be in the fourth, but it's probably somewhere else. Your discussion of Gurdjieff. Yeah. And Gurdjieff is fascinating, obviously fascinating, but his basic theory that, if I have it right, correct me if I don't, that it's important to nature, the function of all the different worlds, that humanity not wake up, that you can have a certain number of awake people, but that it would really screw with the higher worlds if the rest of humanity wasn't asleep, making food for the moon or whatever. And that,
Right.
if humanity doesn't do better than war as a function, it's not going to be of much use to the cosmos. So,
Right.
and Gurdjieff had immense power through Ouspensky and others. How do you hold Gurdjieff's work?
So I don't personally know Gurdjieff's work, but he had a tremendous influence on a lot of people, including, by the way, Whitley Strieber and the whole UFO culture, but also to the Harlem Renaissance and to black literature. And so I think that view that there are only certain people that are tapped into this is essentially the view of esotericism. And I think one is inevitably led to it if one is involved in education long enough. I don't see how that can be denied. Now we can argue whether being food for the moon is the right way to put it. We can talk about the content or how that insight is framed, but I think the idea that you need ears to hear and most people can't hear is an ancient realization. I don't think it's unique.
It was usually very dangerous to speak the truth to large numbers of people, which was why it was encoded in so many different ways, only so that the few could hear it.
Yeah, and religiously speaking, again, a lot of religions are heavily persecuted. Killed, murdered by their social surround, because these are very dangerous things to say. And so I'm trying to affirm that, as somebody who can speak, we have a mechanism in this culture to speak out and to address these ideas.
So the third chapter was the humanist too. The fourth is theory as to rewriting the real. And I want to quote the first two paragraphs here. I think the stakes are sufficiently clear now. What remains is for me to show how we can do this thing, how we can rewrite reality itself, and indeed have been doing so for some time. And this is where it really gets extraordinary. I will proceed through 5 humanist critical traditions: psychoanalysis, critical race theory, post-colonial/queer theory, and eco-criticism. My goal is not to show how the super is ancient and global, how there is an unconscious logic in place that blocks every attempted expression of the superhuman, or how intellectuals might begin to take responsibility for the academy's role in our present crises around meaning and truth, and engage more positively with the full range of human experience, however fantastic that experience gets. Those were the projects of our first 3 chapters, right? My goal, rather, is to show how there is also and always has been a counter movement, a vertical standing up from the chessboard with all those black and white battling pieces, how critique itself, theory as we say, has always been too. And, it just blows my mind that you're able to do that, and that you have enough command, as you clearly do, of these 5 traditions: psychoanalysis, critical race theory, post-colonial queer theory, and eco-criticism, and how you see these as part of the counter movement, starting with psychoanalysis and double consciousness from Mesmer to today. So let's just start with that. In your reading, Mesmer really is the starting point, and Freud kind of, in some sense, I think you could say, diminished the power of mesmerism. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, that's fair. But he also made it. It's a buffer concept, to use Bertrand Muse's phrase. The unconscious and psychoanalysis made this larger field useful and knowable, useful for therapy, for personal lives.
Mm-hmm.
I'm drawing on a friend and colleague there named Adam Crabtree, who wrote a beautiful book called From Mesmer to Freud. And he basically talks about how what we think of as the unconscious began as this superconscious field, and it gets shrunken down to this individual unconscious of Freud and psychoanalysis. But it always contains these counter movements as well. And I'm trying to affirm both of those, both Mesmer and Freud at the same time.
But didn't Jung in some ways re-expand it?
I mean, yes. I mean, Jung is a good example of somebody who's trying to bring Mesmer back in, by the way, but he's very much psychologizing it. In other words, it depends on which Jung. Are you talking about the early Jung, the middle Jung, the late Jung? I mean, there is this movement to, everything becomes, a function of the psyche or the collective unconscious, as he put it. I just don't think that's that helpful, Michael. But again, it's not that Jung didn't play a tremendously important role. Of course he did, but he's just one figure in this movement.
This is kind of an example of how I see you often moving. So you say Freud was not the Freud most assume and have not read, of course, although the real Freud freely admitted that he had no ears to hear the music of mysticism. He didn't. He much admired, really adored, one of the finest intellectual mystics of his generation, the French writer and Nobel laureate and peace activist Romain Rolland, who did know his own extensive mystical states and wrote extensively about comparative mystical literature, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. So this deep friendship remains one of the most iconic models for you of what you're trying to convey. Together, not individually, they perform the superhumanity as friends. The real Freud also routinely encountered anomalous phenomena with his parents. He wrote 6 essays on telepathy and so on. This was not some rare secret or piece of gossip. Ernest Jones admitted as much, quoting his biographer, a letter Freud wrote to a British-American paranormal researcher, which said in Jones's account now, begin quote, "This is Freud, according to Jones." This is amazing. "If I had to live my life over, I should devote myself to psychical research rather than to psychoanalysis," right? So that's what I see you doing repeatedly is you take the received Freud or the received Albert Camus or the received whatever, and you just look around until you find that nugget that you can pull out, which may be a footnote or a private letter, and say, but wait, he actually would have devoted his life to psychical research if he had it to live over.
Right. But I mean, my response, it's not just a nugget. There's 6 freaking essays on thought transference or telepathy. This is not just a footnote. I mean, and you don't have to look around for very long. It's like staring you right in the face is what I would say. So I'm just like, open your freaking eyes. Just wake up. Just look, read.
So let's go on from there to critical race theory. Now, this is totally fascinating. Critical race studies as two. The double consciousness of W.E.B. Du Bois and some Black superhumanisms. You know what this does, which is strategically so important, is that my whole community of progressive counterculture people, when you start pulling out the double consciousness of W.E.B. Du Bois and some of the Black superhumanisms, you really nail people because they can't deny, and this is so incredibly important, that these extraordinarily oppressed people experience the traumas that bring forth the human as two.
Yeah.
Including, I have a very close friend. I've done a long spiritual biography of a man named Orland Bishop. And he has this whole gig about how the passage in the slave ships from Africa here was a spiritually transformative experience,
Yeah.
and he is at the heart of the Los Angeles Center of Black Mystical Studies.
Yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about Du Bois and his deep understanding, having studied with William James, of the humanist too.
Well, Black critical theory is all about social marginality,
Right.
and that's really what I've been trying to say too. The paranormal erupts in social marginality. So you would expect groups of people who are in the social margins to have a particular access, a direct access to the paranormal. And that's exactly what you find, I think, over and over again. I think it's true with Black communities. I think it's true with Hispanic communities. I think it's true with queer communities and colonial communities. I think you find it over and over and over again that there is this linkage of trauma and an access to the impossible or paranormal. And so that's what each of these discussions of the literature is about. Is you can't really understand Black critical theory or psychoanalysis or queer theory unless you take these states seriously. And by that I don't mean literally, but I do mean being seriously. In terms of Black critical theory, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about here is most recently I had dinner with Yvonne Chareau, who wrote a book called Black Magic. I think I discussed it in here. And Yvonne was talking about her colleagues in Black critical theory and why they should be so interested in conjuring and magic and really the anomalous. And of course, we totally share that. I think she's absolutely right about that. And that's just what I'm trying to say here. Now, it's also true that a lot of Black critical theorists, a lot of queer theorists, a lot of post-colonial theorists do not address this up or this depth because they think it takes away from the social or the political. And I want to honor that too. But that's, again, the humanists too. Both of those are going on at the same time is what I'm trying to say here. And the reason that I think humanistic discourses are so resisted is it's just only talking about the horizontal or the political or the social. It's not also talking about the up or the transcendent. And I want to do both. I don't want to do one or the other.
Yeah, and you do. And let's go from Du Bois to La Facultad of Gloria Anzaldúa, the queer post-colonial theory in the New Age. So tell us about her and what La Facultad means.
Well, so Gloria Anzaldúa was a queer Chicana theorist who grew up in South Texas. I learned about her through one of my graduate students, Stefan Sanchez, by the way. And Gloria or Anzaldúa, she attempted a dissertation at UT Austin, University of Texas Austin, never finished it, moved to Santa Cruz, and died in the early 2000s, 2004, I want to say, of complications around diabetes. But she's seen today as very much at the forefront of not just queer theory, but feminist and Chicana theory as well. La Facultad, of course, is Spanish for the faculty, and it has a distinct paranormal dimension to it for Anzaldúa. It refers to knowing the aggressor before the aggressor shows up, and it refers to a kind of precognition or a telepathic content. And she was also deeply committed to what she called mixing or mestiza consciousness, that the consciousness of the future would not be black or white or brown or some other ethnicity. It would be mestiza. It would be mixed. So she's often affirmed around what we call the borderlands humanities, this notion of the middle or the borderland. And of course, she grew up on the border and is very much part of this history as well. But La Facultad has this paranormal dimension to it, I guess is what I want to try to say here. And she believed that consciousness was moving, that human consciousness was moving more and more to an affirmation of La Facultad as a conscious decision or a conscious ability, not only as an unconscious or spontaneous one.
Yeah, your discussion of her is extraordinary. A facultad is an explicitly paranormal capacity or sixth sense that's lain dormant from long ago times, and that is cultivated by marginalized people in order to survive the male violence of history. Violences that can also break a human being open within a spiritual trauma, or what Ansel Dua calls a shamanic susto or soul loss. Essentially, as Ansel Dua understands, such individuals are essentially forced into this occult faculty by the need to know who will next, quote, slap or lock them away. They can sense the rapist when he's 5 blocks down the street. That is to say, they became clairvoyant and precognitive because they have to. This type of radar is latent in everyone, but is most developed in those who are persecuted. And, you know, that, and before we go to eco-criticism, part of my work, as I think you know, is that I'm looking deeply into the global polycrisis and just the total destructiveness of all the intersecting vectors. And one of the things that the polycrisis does is that it creates global trauma. And at least in theory, that global trauma should evoke for some people these qualities and experiences of the humanist too. And we don't know what that's going to mean, because we know that consciousness is primary, but that the mystic is amoral or transmoral. So we may have a world in which the utter destructiveness is evoking global trauma, which in turn is evoking the experience of the humanist too. But we don't know which way that's going to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I think we need these humanists, we need these intellectuals involved in this conversation. And that's why I think it's so damaging to say these things don't happen.
Yeah.
Because you cannot talk about something unless it's part of reality. And if we keep saying stupid shit, like there is no such thing as clairvoyance or telepathy doesn't happen, then we can't talk about them. We can't have these conversations. And I think we should have these conversations. We should be critiquing the morality of everything, of everyone, you know? And we're not, because we're only, and, you know, take post-colonial theory, Michael. I mean, that we're on post-colonial theory. Post-colonial theory generally has been very flatlandish. It's been all about politics and colonial history, but it hasn't been about the vertical, how people experience something that is beyond colonialism. And again, it's not, I want us to do both. I don't want us to do one or the other. We still have to honor that horizontal, that political, that social animal, but we also need to honor and take seriously the reports of the people who experience things that are outside it or above it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of people who respond well to the 5 humanist critical traditions that you're describing: psychoanalysis, critical race theory, post-colonial queer theory, and eco-criticism, who do not want to look at the vertical.
No,
and therefore, by bringing out the vertical in the people that they admire, it creates a bridge to saying, wait a minute, if I'm going to be as hip as I think I am, I better include this.
This is why, this, again, I just think it's all about empathy. It's all about aligning with the individual. It's Jamesian again. Look, if you're going to take these people seriously, listen to them. Don't cut them off in flatland. Don't turn them into good Marxists. Don't turn them into good civil libertarians or Democrats or whatever you are. Listen to them, And this is what I'm trying to say. And when I talk about rewriting the real or creating a reality that is not colonial, this is what I mean. I mean it has this vertical dimension and this horizontal dimension.
Your last major segment in theory is eco-criticism as to dark ecology, non-human agents, and God.
Right.
One person you talk about in depth is your colleague Timothy Morton, and I've read some of his work, and he's pretty fascinating. But you also have a beautiful discussion of Amitai Ghosh. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm
Amitav Ghosh. Uh-huh.
yeah. And you further have a discussion of
Rachel Peterson.
yes, Rachel Peterson and Aura. So I'd love you to speak in any way you'd like about that triad and what you intend by giving them such a critical place in the book.
Yeah, I mean, Tim talks a lot about the ecological thought, which basically is the idea that we are not separate from the natural world. The reality is an ecosystem. It's a hyper object, to use his language again. And Amitabh's books are filled with fictional but also realistic discussions of paranormal events, because he sees this as an expression of this basic ecological unity as well. Rachel, I've known Rachel mostly through what we call the psychedelic renaissance, and as somebody who thinks very critically and sympathetically about psychedelics and the plant world, which is part of the ecosystem, and how these states generate experiences of God and unity, but also how they generate states of hellish separation and dysfunction. And again, she wants to include it all. She doesn't want us to talk about some of it. So I think all of these voices are talking about the ecological as the unitive, or as the cosmic, or as the earth-based in this sense. And I just think this is incredibly important. And I don't know how you talk about ecology without also addressing these vertical transcendent dimensions. Although, of course, people do all the time. They want to talk about post-humanism or eliminating the human subject. And I want to put the human subject, at the center of things again. So I don't know. I don't know what you wanted me to say about those individuals, but I certainly know all three of those individuals and think very highly of their work.
No, I'm just trying to touch on key people so that our listeners get a sense of what they may want to dive further into.
Yeah.
So most interesting in your last section before your epilogue, it's called Evolution and Cosmic Love. And and here your little portrait is of Henri Bergson. And so again, most interesting that you start with Nietzsche and end with Bergson. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us why Bergson deserves this place of honor in this very extraordinary book.
Well, first of all, Nietzsche is usually rejected because of his reception history by the Nazis. The Nazis picked up on his idea of the Superman and thought it was Aryan and took it in a direction that, by the way, Nietzsche would never, ever affirm. Nietzsche died in 1900, by the way, and he was unconscious by, not of this world anyway, by 1889, so well before the Nazis came to be. But he's completely rejected because of that, certainly in Europe. Henri Bergson was a Jew. He was a French Jewish intellectual who literally stood in the rain protesting the Nazi treatment of Jewish intellectuals and died from pneumonia, and wrote of evolution and religion very explicitly, much like but different from Nietzsche, and a completely different reception history. And so what I'm trying to point out, or I guess in between the lines, is that this emphasis on evolution and religion doesn't have one politics or one religious history. It has many, and Bergson occupies a very liberal, progressive position that I think is really important as well. And he ends his last book with this line about the universe is a machine for the making of gods. And I love that line because I think it's true. And B, I think it gets to this issue of evolution and religion in a really profound way. And he also talked about the two sources of religion and morality. And again, this is the humanist too. The one source is tradition and what they say, which is this: you exclude other people and you affirm you believe X, Y, or Z. But the other tradition is you affirm this unity, you affirm this love between the human being and God. And so the two sources of religion and morality are essentially what we've been talking about all along here as well. And this is already in Bergson in the 1920s. And he dies, I think, in the late 1930s, right at the end of the decade.
I'm putting the book down now. There's so much more we could do with it, but I think we've done an adequate job of walking through the key sections. How do you hold this book in the corpus of your work? You've talked about Authors of the Impossible as your favorite book. You've talked about the Esalen book as your immersion with Michael Murphy and Esalen and how important that was, and Aurobindo as a core source there, and how nobody captures the flag at Esalen, but it's been the kind of core of the counterculture. So I've read this as doing the same thing with the humanities that you did with Esalen in a certain way.
I mean, I'll tell two stories about this book. First, I often describe this book as very nerdy, by which I mean it's really aimed at intellectuals and academics, and it's one long complaint, but it's a loving complaint. It's like, doggone it, it's a kind of poking the bear. It's like, come on, and like everybody, all of my academic friends, they always laugh at these jokes in here because they know they're true, they know it's true, and they're funny. Actually, they're making fun of ourselves. Like, the truth must be depressing. They always laugh at that one because it just immediately strikes them as obvious. But the other thing I'll say about this book was published by Kyle Wagner, who was my editor for this. And Kyle basically said to me, okay, Jeff, how do we do it? How do we do the superhumanities? And so I wrote How to Think Impossibly really kind of after that question that Kyle had. And that was really it's his title, How to Think Impossibly. But the notion of the impossible and how to do it, I think, is really at the core of certainly my present work and what I'm most interested in. And I think this book kind of lays out the theory of it in a very effective way, but in a very nerdy way. It's very much about authors and writers and
well, I was stunned by it. I was just stunned by it. And, I read it line by line, underlining just an immense amount of it. And what the experience I have repeatedly with your work is that, being 82 years old, I have lived through this whole period of time. I was very close to the Esalen counterculture world. Bolinas is kind of the ground zero for the counterculture in a lot of ways. And it's funny, if I had a different life to live along with the one I've lived, I would have been a lot more involved actually with the people that you were convening or knew at Esalen. Because I feel like what you did with the Esalen book is to enable me to catch up with what I was living through, but didn't really understand,
Yeah.
Similarly, with the superhumanities, my field was political philosophy. And so I didn't know the history of the humanities in this kind of depth. And the Superhumanities is an extremely persuasive book. And we will do How to Think Impossibly as our next book. And then we'll come back to the two books you co-authored and your extraordinary textbook on religions. So at least that's my approach.
I mean, I'd be curious what you think of how to think impossibly. If it answers the question, how do we do it? I mean, because you'll see me sort of playing with a set of problems and a set of ideas about how we do it. And the other thing to say about this book, The Superhuman, I've been asked to come to a lot of universities and colleges and give talks, mostly to the Centers for the Humanities, because they read this as a kind of call to renew the humanities and do it differently, which of course it is. But it's had a lot. What I'm trying to say is it's had a lot of love, and it's got a reception certainly in the universities and colleges that have made me very happy. I'm going to two. I have two other invitations next year to speak about this very book. At this moment, and there's probably been 6 or 7 of those in the past. So I can count probably 8 or 9 invitations off the top of my head, which are important because it means that it's being read and it's being thought about, and because it's a loving book, but it's also a poking book.
Mm-hmm. I've read How to Think Impossibly before, but one of the things I've learned about my readings of your books is that I may have read one somewhat rapidly, but then when I'm preparing to do a conversation with you, then I try to read line by line, and that greatly deepens it. And I think I want to come back and close with this observation, because I know I'm not alone in this, of how, just like your student who had Nietzsche's Zarathustra jump off the shelf at him. And I had that experience with the book Children Who Remember Past Lives by the successor at UVA, Jim B. Tucker.
Yeah.
And, I actually knew both of their work before, but somehow I hadn't been psychically prepared to say to myself, wait a minute, this is an impeccable methodology. 3,000 children remember past lives. And if that's true, then how many of the other psi phenomena or anomalous phenomena that I have suspected were true, now that I have proof of concept on this set of children? I don't know that everybody has a past life. As you point out, I don't know if the life isn't interrupted early the way these children were. I don't know what stages the soul, or whatever we want to call it, goes through in different cultures in different ways as it continues on some path. But I know that these children remember past lives. And therefore, what about intuition, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, remote viewing, and near-death experiences, and all the rest?
Yeah, it opens up a box. It's Pandora's
It just opens up the locks. And so what I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, and what your work did for me, is that there are lots of other people who have specialized in different sectors of this, but you're the only person I'm aware of who has done a synthesis of all the different portals into the humanist too, and has read as deeply and as widely in as many of the portals. And I actually was first interested in the UFO phenomenon. And so but then I discovered that I couldn't talk about UFOs without losing half my audience.
Yeah.
And so I kind of backed into your work and the humanists too, specifically through the flip, as a way of socializing this. And at least in my circles, UFOs, although they get much more publicity than almost anything else, are still culturally unacceptable, repressed material.
Yeah. Again, try a sexual experience. I mean, there's another one. It's the giggle factor. It just gets. And I'm the guy in the room saying, stop stop giggling. The UFO is like a real thing, and so is this sexual experiment, and it's all on the table. Let's talk about it all. It's just that, reincarnation, most of the humanities presumes a single life. And once you introduce reincarnation as a reality, it changes everything very quickly. And maybe that's what I want to close with is I think that challenge to how it's not just humanities, it's the way we talk about ecology, the way that we talk about identity, the way we talk about politics and law and pretty much everything all presumes one life. And once you take that off the table and introduce many lives, it all changes immediately. And so that's
where the Asian frame, as you point out, comes in as such a fundamentally different frame. Yeah. And Toynbee's great quote that the greatest event of the 20th century may turn out to be the coming of the Dharma to the West.
Yeah, Buddhism, yeah.
Well, Jeff, I can't thank you enough for this whole series. As I said at the start, these readings are changing me, and I think it's a great time in my life to be changed because I will need a new metaphysic at some point in the not entirely distant future.
You will. We all will, Michael. Don't you're not alone. You're among us.
Yeah. As Ram Dass says, all we're doing is walking each other home. So yeah. Jeff Kripal, thank you for being with us at the New School.
Thank you, Michael.
Don't take it, 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 don't take it,
The river is a healer, the river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels